So in thinking about what I wanted to talk about today and my body of work, I started going, okay, sort of what you were doing, but like how did this come about? So I started, and I really like trying to connect the dots in my present to my past and where they happened and how they got connected. So this is sort of a very circuitous journey into my very busy mind and how I got to Fox News and Trash Talk. The first point in this journey is a painting by Picasso called Guernica. It's one of my favorite paintings of all time. This is Picasso's response to the 1937 bombing by the Nazis and fascist Italians on a community or a small town in Spain called Guernica. It was an atrocity, and he was Spanish, of course, and had to respond. And I think he worked on this painting for 10 years. And it is massive. It's probably the size of this wall. I got to see this when I was about 20 years old at the MoMA in my first visit to New York City. It was incredibly impactful to me. One of the really cool parts about the show is that in the room before, they show all of his sketches, all of his iterations that he does. And being a designer and being a process junkie, I really loved seeing the process he went through to develop this, get all the symbology correct, and how much he had to rework and rework to really communicate the raw emotion he was feeling about this. It's gigantic, it's in black and white, and I got to see this again when I was like 48 or 49 years old in Madrid, and it had the same impact on me. And that was right around the time I started doing sculpture and painting, so again, it really was very influential in my journey. The second point in this path was Trump's first impeachment. That's right, there were two of them, in case you forgot. Trump was amazing because he brought reality TV to politics. And every day is like a cliffhanger. We've got these reoccurring cast of characters. We've got special characters who make just a little tiny presentation this week or that week. And this trial was really, to me, like reality TV. So I sort of started to take on the role of a courtroom sketch artist. So I would come home and listen to this or watch the news, and I had bought these cheap notebooks from Staples. Actually, I got a classmate of mine here, Julie Beinke, is in from New York for this, and you're good friends with Michael Beirut. And I had read somewhere that he does all his stuff in these cheap sketchbooks, notebooks from Staples. So I thought, Michael Beirut can do that, I can do that. So I bought a whole stack of these and I started sketching in them. So I would do them in black and white, and I'd take a photograph of it and then colorize it in Photoshop and create these little illustrations. So obviously you have Trump and Robert Mueller and Nancy Pelosi and Jim Jordan and Maria Yankovic and Adam Schiff, Rudy Giuliani, Ambassador Sondland, Alexander Vindman, Jerry Nadler, who was the chairman of that committee. People who have, many of these people have just, we don't even know about them anymore. I had to go back and refresh my memory who I was sketching. But this really was something was a major point in like when trying to interact with the news in a different way. The next point in the journey was COVID and George Floyd. Before I took over this gallery, this was a gallery space called Dick Waller's Art Space. And I had a show that opened here on February 20th of 2020. Just say that again, February 20, 2020, I had a show open here. And it was packed. A lot of people were here that night. We had a jazz band in here. We had people from the East Coast and the West Coast. It was a fantastic night. Of course, the show shut down almost immediately because of COVID. I foolishly thought, well, this is cute. This will be done in a couple of weeks. So again, to try to respond to it, I thought, well, I've got this big space. When people come back to the show, I want to have a new piece of artwork. So I did this. I decided I wanted to do this giant poster, illustration, 6 feet by 9 feet, really addressing the social distancing, which was a brand new word in our vocabulary. That show featured a body of work of mine called TWOODS, TWOODS, which are sculptures, animations, and paintings that I had done a lot of work to prepare all these pieces for the show. Of course, nobody really got to see them during the show. But I did this painting, and incorporates two of my TWOODS. And again, this was 6 feet to the button between their hands so that they were completely social distance. Each one of them is holding, one of them is holding the lotus flower, and the other one's holding an iris, which are both symbols of hope in the art world. This was the quote that was on top of it, that was incorporated. Hope is being able to see there is light despite all the darkness, by Desmond Tutu. I loved that quote and the hope it brought. And I also liked incorporating content into my visual, which was not something I had been doing before. And it felt like a real, sort of response to an event that happened. That happened, and the 2 weeks passed, and I thought, well, it'll open up soon. But then George Floyd was murdered by the cops in Minnesota, and the protests broke out. On the first night of protests, somebody threw a brick through this window. They stole a sculpture of mine. They broke another sculpture of mine. And then the place got boarded up for good. And so all my work was sitting in here, and not being seen. And like everybody else in the world, it was like, wow, poor me. But it's like, okay, it's not that big of a deal. But I thought, I wanted to paint something on the plywood. So I came up with an illustration idea for that, but the owner didn't want to use it. And again, he was using my twos. And I created this poster called Together for Justice to raise money for the Bail Front project to help people who are peaceful protesters who are arrested, to help them meet their bail requirements. So I sold this online through my website, social media, et cetera, and made about $1,000 for the Bail Front project. And that was really the first time I ever dipped my toe into doing something, sort of using art as social activism. And it was sort of like, well, that's pretty cool. I like that. I'm going to keep myself aware, or keep that in the back of my head. Now, the next point in this journey is like a whiplash, because that May, the New York Times read an article on the 50th anniversary of the Hard Hat Riot in Lower Manhattan. It was in 1970. And I had never heard of this before. I don't know if anybody here has ever heard of this riot, but a bunch of construction workers, electricians, plumbers, blue-collar guys, hard hat guys, descended on a group of people protesting for peace to beat the shit out of them. This just sort of like blew my mind away a couple ways. Number one, I had never heard of it, and I was 12 years old at the time, so it seemed like that's something that was fairly newsworthy. So it's like, how did that just pass over? And secondly, this weird irony of people beating up people who are protesting for peace. I mean, that's like really hard to understand. And I'm looking at these guys, and they're so angry and they're so visceral. And this is coming at the time where we have all this conversation about angry white men and voting for Trump, and all the Trump supporters being angry white men, and what's happening to the white men in this country, and why are they so angry? So again, I started to go, okay, I need to respond to this and start looking at this and going, what is this about? And what can I make any art out of it? So I started doing these sketches of these angry white guys from these photographs. These are done on a board. I put a red base down and then painted on top of them and scratched back to get the red coming out of it. These very violent little mark makings to sort of capture sort of the rage and anger these guys project that I fear, that I worry about and am concerned about happening to our country. I thought I would do a big show about these and have a whole wall of them, but I quite honestly at that point in time just said I can't live with these people and be staring at them all the time. That's just a little too much. It was this May, turning into a beautiful summer. It was COVID. We had to stay away from everybody. I was antsy, so this gets me to my next point, which is Spring Grove Cemetery. I decided that I needed to be outdoors painting, and I could go off by myself. I didn't have to wear a mask. I got to be out in the sunshine, and I would just set up my easel and paint doing like an hour or two painting, using the statuary and the sculpture as my models. They're really great models. They don't move. They hold their pose forever. They take the light really well, which is tremendous. This is actually at a cemetery in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but you sort of get the idea. Anyway, out of that came a series of about 20 to 25 small 12 by 18 paintings I did. Very quick, very gestural. I'm a designer by trade, so my natural tendency is to be really tight and find the grid and do everything in a very organized way, and I'm always trying to break out of that, find a way not to be tight. So this was a really good exercise for me to do and be really loose and be outside. Again, black and white, so sort of a key thing here. So summer moved into fall. All my work is in here, not being seen. And I'm starting to look for new studio space because my space is too small. When Dick Waller, who owned this space, retires, and I get offered to take over the lease of this space. So in December of that year, 20, I took over and I spent the next 6 months preparing the place to open on April 15th of 2021. I opened this place with the sort of a mission of really trying to use art to have a broader discussion about the world, as we're doing here today with this work, as we did in the spring with All Else Pales, but how does art become, sort of transcend the beautiful and become topical and thought-provoking. And so I'm really excited about this show and to have Devin be a part of this show to sort of help bring that mission to life. So I wrote this out before I started this. Our mission is to provide an arena for the exchange of ideas and to use art as a conduit for a discussion of big and small ideas and about the society and the world around us. I just reread this morning. I hadn't read it since I put it on my website a year and a half ago, and I'm really very tickled that this maps with that so accurately. Next point on this is baseball and guns. Again, a piece I saw in the New York Times about an active shooting event at the Washington Nationals ballpark in Washington, D.C. And this photograph appeared. And this photograph just really stopped me in my tracks for a minute because, it's really got a great dynamic composition to it. It's got circular composition, things going each way. There's so much fear in their faces, and it feels very visceral. And to me, it was like there was something deeply ironic about the national pastime, which is supposed to be this bucolic, peaceful event, very, white event, and these guys running for their lives because they're at a baseball game. And then thinking, well, how many people in that ballpark are gun right activists, really for the Second Amendment and everybody be able to carry guns? And what is that, that irony about them having to run for their lives? And this is also a time where there's so much news about so many men being exposed for their past behaviors. Jeffrey Epstein, Weinstein, Bill Cosby, etc. All these people, Andrew Cuomo, all these people being called out for, their egregious behavior especially towards women and the people who work for them. So I thought, well, there's something in here I need to explore. So I created this piece, which is called Under Siege, which is like flashlight underneath these guys. They've just been exposed for something, and they've been found out, and they're scared shitless, and they've got to run for their lives, but they don't know which direction to go. Each one of them is being called out in a different direction. It's very garishly painted on purpose to sort of almost be circus-like. And I really had a fun time. I worked on this for a long time to try to get the composition right and the colors right and the lighting and everything like that. And so I did this piece, and at the same time I was doing this, I was working on a whole series of new sculptures. So I was very busy at this point. As I'm working on these things, I bought a new house with my partner Elaine, and I was so excited because we got this new fancy fire pit, one of those stainless steel ones. And the first night I had it, I put it out, and 4 or 5 hours later I went out just to make sure it was cool enough to, put the protector, the top of the cover over it. So I put my hand on it. Of course, it was like 1,000 degrees still, and I burnt the shit out of my hand. Pardon my expression. I got 2nd degrees all over my left hand, and all of a sudden I couldn't sculpt. I had to give up on all the sculptures, and I was like, okay, I was just in a really good role. And, still thinking about that previous painting and the expressions of those people. And this is also happening during the pandemic, and I'm becoming aware of this problem, which is everybody's getting everything delivered in cardboard boxes. You know, we're getting you could get a toothpick delivered from Amazon in a cardboard box about this big that day. It's so convenient. But you know, it's like you come home and we were doing it. Everybody was doing it, or you were getting takeout food, but became really aware of all the cardboard boxes. And I'm not a person who sits still for very long, so I wasn't going to let my hand keep me down. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go back to painting. I sort of like that black and white thing, but I like that expression thing. I don't really know what I want to do, but I have this box, and I have some black and white paint. So I'm going to do this painting. So I do this painting of Andrew Cuomo. It's right around the time he gets kicked out of being governor of New York. Just big and gestural and spontaneous and not really well, you know, not thinking about it, just sort of responding to it. I thought, well, that was sort of fun. I liked the way they did that. I liked the mark making in it. I liked the spontaneity of it. It was free and loose. So I decided to do another one. So I did Sarah Palin, who had crept up on her news feed because she was, you know, saying something stupid about COVID or something like that. And at the same time I was doing this, I was part of a social media class to learn how to use social media better. And you know, one of the things that came up was you should do videos. So I videotaped myself doing her and put it online. And I was like, wow, a number of people saw that, liked that, and commented on it. So I decided, well, I'm just going to keep that up. So I kept doing them, and I kept doing them. I was doing them of world leaders. I was doing them of broadcasters. I was doing them of political figures. Yes, there are Democrats in there. And I was like doing these things, and I was trying to figure out what I was doing with these. And so they populated all over the place. And they became known as Box News, which was Elaine's term. Over dinner one night, and she goes, well, this is Box News. I'm like, of course it's Box News. So I was trying to figure out what to do with this. Because, you know, like Devin, it was like, what am I going to do with this? Who wants to see this? How am I going to do this? When I went to a panel discussion at the Clifton Cultural Arts Center on art activism that Devin happened to be on. And I was sitting there listening to this, and Devin comes up, and I believe it was this painting or that painting had won second prize in the Golden Ticket Show the previous year. We both had pieces in that show, and I remember that piece, and I had not met her, and I was like, okay, I'm doing a show with her. So I called her up the next day and went over and saw her work, and we agreed to do a show, and we spent the better part of the last 6 months coming up with Trash Talk, which is what you're here to see today. And that's it. That's the